Under the law today, and in reality, a person with a disability is anyone who has a permanent impairment that affects their ability to live their life, to get dressed, to eat, to walk, to bend, to carry, to work, to remember, all of those kinds of things. We call them major life functions. Well, most of us in our lifetime are going to have an impairment that keeps us from performing a major life function. Let's think about who we have in our workplace. We may have someone who has diabetes, and that person is a person with a disability because they have an impairment that but for the insulin, but for their ability to take that, they would not be able to perform a major life function. Well, we don't know that person has diabetes. They're sitting in our workplace, they're performing their job. What are we focusing on? We're focusing on their talent, their education, their ability to perform their tasks, their work performance, and it really ought to be that way with all of the workers we have in our workplace. Focus on the abilities. If you are focusing as an employer on abilities and you are focusing on the objective evaluation criteria of job performance, you do not have to worry about liability exposure. Your focus is where it needs to be. How is the person performing their job? Not on their impairment. And all of your job records are going to reflect that. So you can never stop anyone from bringing a claim, but the fact of the matter is people with disabilities don't bring employment lawsuits or charges of discrimination any more than any other type of employee. If anything, it's less. And just like any other employee you have in your workplace, documentation is the way that you defend yourself. So let's talk about what makes a work environment that removes barriers or prevents barriers to people who have disabilities. Well, the first thing is to have a job application that announces to folks if you have a disability, if you need accommodation, if you need help filling out this application, please notify us. You have a job advertisement that says, we encourage people with disabilities. There are two ways an employer may find himself or herself having to go through the reasonable accommodation process with the worker. One is that they have someone who lets them know they have an impairment or comes in to do the application process where the disability or the impairment is obvious. The second way is that the employer has a healthy employee that, God forbid, becomes ill with a major illness or is in some sort of accident and they're coming back to work. The employee's own physician is often a resource for what type of work or essential functions the employee can perform and what accommodation alternatives need to be investigated. We have some employers in the state of South Dakota that are a shining beacon for how employers can achieve success with removing barriers in the workplace to people with disabilities. I'd like to invite you now to come with me to talk to some of these employers, and we'll find out the practical applications and how it feels for an employer to go through the reasonable accommodation process. So let's go and see what we can find out.
What I find, at least from the HR perspective, is the process barriers. The processes that people either knowingly or most oftentimes unknowingly put into place that can prevent people from successfully being an applicant for a position. And one that we've talked about before is maybe not letting people know there's an alternative way to apply for a job. Here at Pennington County, what we do is everybody has to apply online. But there's a disclaimer that says if there's a physical or an ADA disability related reason that you're not able to, please call this number, please email us, just let us know, and we'll work with you to get your application submitted successfully. We're all striving to get the person that has the best knowledge, skills, and abilities onto our team. And so letting people know that regardless of ability, disability, race, color, sexual orientation, whatever it is you decide for your organization, letting people know that you're willing to work with them and having an open environment and creating that open dialogue is the key. It's setting the pace for it right away. And then if for your existing workforce, creating an environment where people become comfortable talking to you about the situations that are going on in their life. Sometimes the accommodations can be temporary, sometimes they could be permanent, but I think it's just letting your employees know if you ever need to talk to me about this type of thing or whatever the case may be, they can come to you and talk to you about that. We have a signed agreement with the Department of Justice for our Americans with Disabilities Act agreement. And the things that we need to do are not intrusive for an employer our size. There's some handrails we have to raise or lower. There's some bathroom fixtures we have to change out. There's a few doorknobs from a 1917 building that have to be replaced. But the vast majority of the things we're doing is providing information and providing my name and my contact information in our buildings, in our programs, and in the community. So if people have a question, if they have an issue, or if they have a complaint, they know where to go. And that's really the focus of most investigations is, are you being accessible to people with questions?
Since we do work with the federal government and the state government, we work with the community, it's important for us to consider all the people that may be coming in to do the project with us, or what we're building, or the clients that we're working with. And so it's very important to have those diverse thoughts, and we think we come up with better solutions for that. And not just, somebody with a different background, but someone who has different abilities makes a big difference as well. We've had people in wheelchairs, we've had people that have had surgeries and then come back and they have some disability that requires some accommodations. And it really doesn't take that much. I think the one thing with people with disabilities is sometimes their talents are overlooked, and that sometimes they have maybe an unseen talent that with a little exploration can come forth and really enhance the workplace.
One of the things that doesn't happen with an employee is they don't walk into my office and say, I need an accommodation. Generally it's, this is hurting, or I'm having trouble seeing the screen, or this mouse hurts my wrist, or my wrist is hurting, and they use the mouse a lot. It's generally not, textbook things. You look for the signs of what might be causing it. But it really comes down to just having a conversation with the employee, and generally eventually their physician, about what it is they can do, not necessarily what they can't do. The can't-dos are important in some jobs in order to make sure we don't injure somebody or we put them in an unsafe position. But for the vast majority of the time, it's really, well, what can they do? How do we make that happen? I think the biggest difference between perceptions of reasonable accommodation and reality is really its cost, and also that I have to change the job. The law doesn't require, nor would it make sense, to create a job that you don't need or that doesn't make sense. And I think that is a big misperception in the world. And I think it's one of the things that scares people about having people with disabilities in the workplace, that I'm going to have to do something that doesn't make sense for my business. That's not at all what the law requires. You should never do something that doesn't make sense. What you should do is what makes sense for your business, and in most cases allows you to hire or keep a very good employee.